In the telling trade, credit should be given where credit is due, so they say. Now blame, same would be my way, but I'll let you decide on your own which is best to bestow upon the avant-garde playwright of my Montrose neighborhood, Geraldine Pfister, for she was the impetus of this story. You see, she was looking for new material, so she came right down to my guild meet, and she sat right down by my good seat. Then she peered right down at my gross feet and barked right out, "God damn those dogs!" Well, let me tell you this. Her brazen bit of familiarity felt a bit indecorous to me, she having not offered me first a friendly salutation. So I growled, "Yes, Dame Pfister, they are long, wide, and flat on the bottom. They're bent, bowed, and buckled by bunions, coarse, calloused, plus itching and stinking. But what else would I use under legs for my walking? What about these dogs?" Again, she looked down and said, "I think you keep a dog at home." So then I puffed up and said, "Well, your opinion, madam, is in the minority. Everyone else says my darling Sarah Draper is an incomparable beauty." Next, with pointing, she said, "I suspect a history of chewing going on down there." Vexed, rejoindering, I said, "I simply refuse to elaborate on any of the unproven crimes of my past. But I assure you, ma'am, that these days, these arthritic legs are too stove up stiff to ever again take these toes to my teeth for their nightly nail nibbling." Well, that shut her up. The silence I saw ensued, there being no repair to our repartee. Well, that night I went home and started writing an essay on the underlying theme but soon befell some bizarre business, so closely related that I mounted the two together into this diptych of oral art I call Assessments and Assumptions. And now for you, I'll tell the remainder, just how I do today remember. It's not new, I need you to know, that a number of naughty know-nothings announce their negative notions near this nice neighbor when I navigate the gnarly nuances of the narrow, not new, sidewalks of my Montrose when I'm wearing my old comfortable shoes, since so unseemly they seem to some to seem. But I'll surely show you I shan't be shamed by the shape of my shoes now. For I do not apologize for loyalty to my lower leather. No, once I'm introduced to shoes whose company I enjoy, we're not easily parted, no matter how worn out I feel. Goodness gracious, to get me to give up galoshes would take the guile and the grit of the gods of the Greeks. And oh, what a ripe reality I'd reap, I'll say, were an obsolete celestial to mess around with this new model mortal. But indeed, what a mighty match it might make, pitting its powers to my principles. The trouble is that people make assessments, assumptions even, based on our appearance, though that rarely serves the larger truth. Now, we all do it. I'm not immune. In fact, I argue that our Darwinian processes rely on it. For what would our species look like if, before risking our rigorously rehearsed rites and rituals of randy reproduction, we hadn't made assessments and assumptions of someone's dandy mutation? Seen any mutations you like out there recently, anyone? Well, keep looking. But note now, assessments and assumptions can stifle the open mind, creating stagnant habits of thought. So please, folks, be careful when you're making your assessments and assumptions, because some people accumulate mysteries not solved by readily available clues. For instance, the people walking freely in my Montrose today with locked-in narrow ideas, who think it inconceivable, find it incongruous to their sense of possibilities when they hear rumors from the old-timers that at one time, long ago, though a glance at my accoutrement of late may speak of otherwise, I once was indeed a dogged dresser. I had a rack of handsome suits, drawers of beautiful sweaters, but the pride of my closet was my vast collection of fine footwear. I simply had some of the best shoes made in America and in England. Back when shoes were actually made in America and in England. Handmade in America and England even. Not all sweatshops sewn in Singapore or robot built in Bangalore. I had Aldens. I had Cole Haans. I had Allen Edmonds. I was slumming when I stepped out in my Johnson and Murphys. I had Churches, Clark. No one in Montrose had a better representation of fine quality, classic design, gentleman shoes than I. Now, of course, all this was decades ago, and truly it pains me to recall. But the tragic reason for my general fastidious habitude was, frankly, I suffered from a terrible affliction that runs in my family. Now, it's not just the narcissism, something far more confining that once contracted most people must take to the grave. I had a couple of bouts as a child, but it wasn't until the year I left school that I came down with a full-blown case of employment. Fortunately, that didn't last long, and my religious regard for my raiment eroded, leaving nothing but an ardent love of old, comfortable shoes. Now, the storytelling masters that I've been studying might likely say that this self-centered, too-true story is overdue for punching up with a juicy conflict. But my being a social slacker, a consummate keep-to-myselfer, I don't engage in a lot of personal conflicts. But I will bristle to the core if accosted by any self-serious, so-called authority figure. So for Act 2, I'll relate a recent run-in I had with one to you. I rode my bicycle the other day along those beautiful bayou trails north of my Montrose. I rode hard and got thirsty, so I cruised over to our skateboard park for its amenities. I wheeled right past the outside gates, slipped right by the sign-in window, coasted right up to the water fountain, bent right down to take my sip. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see I was being studied by the guard they commissioned after 9/11 to protect the skaters from terrorists, or vice versa if you've seen our skaters. And my being a magnet for the constabulary, he made a beeline for me. Well, I just kept my head down at the fountain, hiding behind the stream of water till he walked right up and I was looking down at his feet. I thought he was going to start some small talk about me not signing in, or maybe about me riding past that little sign on the gate, that 4 by 5 foot little sign that reads "No Bikes!" exclamation point. Well, I looked up at his 6'4", 280-pound frame, hands on his hips, leaning forward, frowning down at me. And I could just tell he was making assessments and assumptions. Now, y'all don't know me all that well, I guess, but the introduction to this dissertation was your indication that conversations bring me jeopardations. But since my immediate future hung in the balance over what happened next, it seemed prudent that proceedings should start with my greetings. But what sputtered through my lips was this possibly displeasing query, "And what's your problem today?" And a sinking feeling fell over me right as I said it. Well, So surprisingly, somewhy, that century softened somewhat. He dropped his hands from his hips and raised one to his chin to stroke, as he leaned back a little bit and looked me over head to toe, mostly toe, while fine-tuning his assessments and assumptions. Well, like a proper copper, following a visual investigation comes a verbal interrogation. "Sir," he whined. "Yes," I whimpered. Good cop, bad cop, I couldn't tell, so I braced myself for the serious business that was sure to follow. He reared back, took an authoritative breath, looked me square in the eyes, and asked, "What size shoe do you wear?" Well, let me tell you this. His brazen bit of familiarity felt a bit indecorous to me, he having not offered me first a proper introduction. But I was cordial this time. 12 wide, I said, when Lady Luck leads to their location. Ecstatically, he stated, "That's my size too." Then astoundingly, he asserted, "And I've got a new extra pair here in the office today that I'm just going to let you have." Well, all of a sudden, my sinking feeling was eclipsed by his surreal folly. He had mistaken me for homeless. Now, that's not the first time that's happened, I admit, but seldom does my seamed suffering set up such a sudden subsidy from the soft-touch citizenry. So I looked down at my shoes. So sad they seemed. Big toes sticking out of a hole, foam poking through the padded tongue, knots in several places up and down the laces, and I felt a pebble poking through a flimsy flapping sole. Conflicted and confused, I pondered my position. But just then a loud rumbling fell from a cloud above, followed by a close-by clap of lightning. Apparently, the champion of this charity was Zeus himself. And I didn't relish a run-in with the ranking Olympian. So I said, "Oh, what a ripe reality I'd reap, I'll say, were my obsolete sneakers to move aside for some new-bought brogans. And indeed, what a mighty match it might make, putting new footgear onto my feet here." So as the guard went into the little shack to get the shoes, I hollered out, "You know, rare is the occasion that anyone from my realm encounters anyone from yours who is so thoughtful and so generous. And I hope you will always be just as thoughtful and generous to me as you are here today. For I'll need to look you up in the future. In about a decade's time, I expect. Just as soon as these good shoes I already have on finally wear out." And I jumped on my bike and rode home as fast as I could, still wearing my old comfortable shoes that so much do I love, that bold neighbors and friends still make their fun of.